You're watching Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. Today, Secretary Pete Hegseth saying U.S. forces are continuing to deliver blows to Iran's military in the opening week of Operation Epic Fury, crippling key naval and missile capabilities, while also signaling that a larger and more sustained campaign is underway. And President Trump says that he wants to be in the loop on the decision to replace Iran's supreme leader. Let's bring in retired Marine Intelligence Officer and host of the Strap podcast, Hal Kempfer. He's on the phone with us tonight. And Hal, the president told Axios that he needs to be personally involved in selecting Iran's next leader. He also called the supreme leader's son a lightweight who won't be acceptable. From the U.S.'s perspective, what kind of person would actually be acceptable?
Well, that's kind of a question, Austin, that nobody's quite sure. There's been some speculation that that President Trump would accept, for example, somebody from the IRGC. That's obviously a little bit disturbing because they're very ideologically oriented towards being basically pro-regime, in charge of the regime now. But it's really not sure who he'd be interested in seeing be the supreme leader. Obviously, Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah, the deposed Shah, his name has come up quite often. The problem that the president has is there isn't a clear figure that can rise up and take over. One of the problems that happened over the years is that when the Iranian regime identifies someone who is kind of becoming prominent in the anti-regime movement, they would arrest them, in some cases execute them, or that person be forced to flee the country. And at that point, they were no longer a threat to the regime, but that leaves kind of a deficit. That's kind of the same problem we have with Russia. If I was to say who would be the logical choice to take over if there was a overthrow of Putin, I'd be stuck because he has basically killed most of the folks that would have taken over. That's kind of the problem they have there. So there may be somebody that we have in mind. There may be somebody or individuals that we've been talking to or communicating with in some way, but it's just not clear. But he has made it clear. Doesn't really said that he's going to pick the next leader, but he has said he wants to have a say in who that will be.
Iran's foreign minister told NBC that they're ready for a ground invasion by American troops and that they're confident that it would be a disaster for the United States. Have we seen any evidence to suggest Iran can truly be ready for a U.S. ground offensive? Given what we know about their military capabilities, Hal, what kind of ground fight do we expect they can actually put up?
Well, first off, I want to say whatever the foreign minister of Iran says, Araghchi, I don't listen to him. He's just, he's a propaganda machine, and he always has been. We don't have a ground force that is arrayed to go against them. I mean, actually, that would probably help them since they don't really have a Navy or an Air Force to speak of. What's going on right now puts them at a complete, a complete setback. I mean, they're really pushed back. They don't have any advantages, I should say. The only thing they have is a ground force. I think what they would hope, yes, they do have, I think, about 1,700 tanks or something, but they're older tanks, are not very capable, poorly maintained. They have a lot of armored vehicles, a lot of artillery, but this stuff is, a lot of it's in really bad shape, and it's really not a well-maintained force at all. What they would hope is if the U.S. came in with ground troops that they could somehow foment a insurrection-type movement, a resistance movement, akin to what we ran into with the Taliban in Afghanistan or kind of like the insurgency over in Iraq. That would be what they'd hope. But frankly, we don't have a ground force that's planning on moving in. And as far as I can tell, that's never been part of the planning, that we will put troops in there. Any boots on the ground stuff look to me like maybe some isolated raids or something like that with special operations forces, but there is no big movement to do so. So when he says that, I'm not quite sure what his goal is. Probably the same thing. He's probably thinking I'm going to intimidate the U.S. like intimidating the Gulf states by bombing them. It doesn't really do much for him, and in actuality, it kind of blows back on him for even saying stuff like that.
So I've been taking live looks at Beirut, Lebanon. We've got the live vantage point on our screen right now. Hal is joining us via the phone tonight. But Hal, we've also been asking our viewers to send in questions. Producer Jonah here is on our new producer camera. And Jonah, you've been going through these. What are you seeing?
Yes, Austin, I'm very happy to jump on here and try something new at LiveNOW. Obviously, a very busy week for us, but I have a couple questions that are from our viewers. The first one is from John S., all the way in Australia, who is asking, how could the U.S. help assist in regime change and prevent civil war in Iran? That one for you, Hal.
That's a really good question because, well, frankly, as you know, there are reports coming out and more reports coming out today that there's a resistance movement, a militia movement that's opposing the regime that's popping up in the Kurdish area. And there's talk about the Azeris. In fact, Iran just bombed Azerbaijan, kind of make a statement to Azerbaijan to say, don't support the separatist movement there, which I thought was interesting. So in that regard, that's kind of I don't know if you want to call it a civil war, but it is kind of a civil war. They're trying to break off, become separate areas, and we're definitely with the Kurds. We seem to be very much behind that. So I don't know if we're going to try and prevent a civil war in that regard. But as far as regime change, the idea right now, and this is part of what we're executing, I should say, is we're going after the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, all right, and of course this this kind of ideological militia that they have as well. And basically, these are a couple things that prop up the regime. So we've been targeting them, trying to cause attrition, trying to destroy their command and control, trying to basically make it impossible for them to repeat what they did in December and January when they went after the protesters and may have killed, some estimates are as high as 30 or 40,000 protesters. We're trying to stop that from being a reality. If they cannot oppose the protests, if the protesters were on the streets and they could actually, take over government buildings, take over government offices, things like that, the possibility of a regime change simply by being unopposed is a reality. The other side too, and we definitely are saying this a lot, is we're trying to encourage all the Iranian forces to lay down their arms. But particularly, we would like to see the Artesh, which is the more secular military and certainly the secular police forces, to not weigh in on the side of the regime if this comes about, but to actually side with the Iranian people. If all that came about, that would be a way that it could happen, and we're doing it right now through air power, missiles, things like that.
We did get some video in today from CENTCOM. This is exactly what they posted, Hal. Let's take this in full. Today, Secretary Hegseth and Admiral Cooper updated the U.S. And updated all of us, I should say, on their naval progress. They said that Operation Epic Fury has sunk more than 30 Iranian ships. It's slashing the Iranians' missile launchers, and they're also shifting toward dismantling Tehran's missile production. CENTCOM posted this today, showing what they say is an Iranian drone carrier ship, roughly the size of a World War II aircraft carrier. So Hal, if you take out a country's naval capabilities, how crippling is that to their military as a whole?
It's not any country, it's Iran, and that's very specific. With any country, it depends on which country it is with their naval capabilities. Some countries have very little in any way of naval capabilities. Iran had considerable naval capabilities, relatively speaking, of looking at its neighbors and stuff like that. What this does, though, is it stops them from projecting power, certainly on the seas. Now, there is something that I have not seen yet, and that is the plethora of small boats and these midget submarines that the Revolutionary Guard Corps has in the Strait of Hormuz, and the capability to lay a lot of sea mines in the Strait of Hormuz. Those are a couple of capabilities I'd like to hear more about. But as far as the big assets like this, you may recall sometime back when there was the drone wave or whatever over New Jersey and all over the eastern seaboard. And there was a story out there that this drone carrier, Iranian drone carrier, was sitting off the coast and it was launching all these drones. Well, that story was completely untrue, but it did point to the fact that they did have this drone carrier that could do something like this. Now that's gone. And basically, we're just simply eliminating all their Navy, which really curtails their ability to protect any ships that are carrying arms to any of their proxies anywhere, like the Houthis. Any ability to move anything themselves directly in that regard. And it leaves the, basically all the waterways around Iran completely exposed. So it can make a big difference, and I think it was a very smart move. I've been looking at Iran for a lot of years, and every time I looked at it, it's like first thing I'd want to do, or one of the very first things, was take out the Navy, and that's exactly what we did.
I hear producer Jonah has another question standing by. Jonah?
Yes, Austin, another question for Hal here, this time from Carol out in California. And just remember, to all of our viewers, you can scan that QR code on your screen using your phone, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those questions on the air. But as for Carol's question, she asks, are Iranian citizens still taking to the streets? And are they being killed by the police or military? Of course, this is something that we heard about in the many weeks and the months leading up to the strikes on Saturday, but not so much we've been hearing about it this week.
Well, they actually had curtailed a lot. There was a big surge in counter-protest killings, for lack of a better term, in January that took place, and just the sheer carnage inflicted by the regimes, the IRGC and the regime's basically forces killing protesters meant that people basically quit protesting. Now, what I've seen is some video of some cities further away from Tehran in other areas where there are protesters out on the street, anti-regime protesters, but they are further away from Tehran, further away from some of the major Persian-dominated cities, and so we're seeing some of that. But that's one of the things that everybody's watching for. Is there a point, and this will be an attrition issue, this will be, when there's enough destruction of the regime's security forces that people might feel comfortable to go out and actually protest on the streets. And right now, they're not there. Of course, the other thing is there's such an active air war going on with constant strike missions and stuff. I think some people are a little nervous about going out in the streets just because they hear explosions all the time, and that's a natural human reaction. So I think when we finally achieve air supremacy across Iran, we already have, what I've told today is we have localized air supremacy in certain parts of Iran. That's pretty significant. But when it's completely over Iran, and we can basically attack at will, I think at that point you might start to see people feel confident enough to come out in the streets and express themselves, and also feel that maybe there's not enough, the strike missions have dissipated to a degree that they're not under any physical threat of an accidental injury or something like that.
Al Kempfer joining us over the phone today. Let's get to this from Bahrainian officials, Hal. A hotel and 2 residential buildings in Bahrain were struck by Iran, officials said tonight. No one was killed, and first responders put out a fire at the building. Hal, we know that the U.S. Fifth Fleet is based in Bahrain. Are the Iranians aiming for civilian structures? Are these poorly targeted missiles? Could these be the remnants of intercepted missiles? I'm just trying to understand why we're still seeing residential buildings being hit in countries that are not directly involved in this war.
Well, as you know, I kind of have a little history with Bahrain. I've been there quite a bit, going back to Desert Storm. I've been there certainly more recently. It's a city I kind of know, and certainly the base I know. And so, yes, initially I would have said they were aiming strictly at the base. They were trying to go after the naval complex there and some of the buildings, and they did hit them. However, with that said, I'm looking at not just Bahrain, I'm looking at other places like the UAE, Qatar, and elsewhere, and it's very clear that they are aiming to actually hit buildings to create terror, if you will, with the civilian infrastructure out there and residential areas, and basically saying to everyone that no place is safe. And so I don't think they're just aiming at U.S. bases anymore. I think they actually are aiming directly at these Gulf states that are hosting U.S. bases, and kind of indiscriminate. I mean, why would you hit residential buildings? Why would you aim at a hotel unless you were just trying to kind of terrorize the population and try to intimidate the government in some way?
So, Hal, I think we have one more from Jonah. I believe we have one more in. Is that right, Jonah?
That's right, Austin. This one from Noah, who is asking, what happens if the IRGC doesn't surrender in Iran? Of course, this is something that President Trump is hoping for, but this person is asking, what if that doesn't happen?
Well, I'm going to say I don't think it'll ever happen. I don't ever imagine in my mind that the IRGC will willingly surrender. Now, I do imagine in my mind that a lot of those who would be in charge of the IRGC surrendering could end up not being around anymore because it's a very effective targeting. And I think that's a very realistic scenario that they might simply just be taken out. I think what really happens is the IRGC is degraded, the IRGC's command and control, its cohesion, everything starts to break down. At some point, the population feels confident enough to come out like they did in December and January and express themselves in the same way. I mean, if you look at what it's not a far-fetched thing. If you look at what was happening in December and January in the streets of cities across Iran, I mean, there was a lot of question, which is, are they going to overthrow the regime? And the only thing that stood in their way was the regime's henchmen, if you will. You take out pardon the expression, but you take out or eliminate or degrade the henchman capability, the Iranian people will probably do the same thing they did before. And the thing I keep pointing to, and that's obviously the thing that the Trump administration points to, Israel points to as well, will the secular military, will the secular police force, when it gets to that point, are they gonna side with the regime? And there's a lot of reasons why they wouldn't want to, not the least of which is when they're out there, when they're killing people on the streets, they're killing their family members. They're killing people they know, their friends, their families and stuff. Or will they side with the Iranian people? And the hope is that there will be a tipping point there where they say, hey, we're in with the Iranian people. These guys got to go. And it changes over the entire dynamic.
I got to ask you one more thing about this conflict, Hal. It has to do with Blue Sparrow missiles. This was a new one to me. We're learning that Israel used what's called a Blue Sparrow missile to kill Khamenei. Blue Sparrows don't work like a usual missile, do they, Hal?
Well, they do and they don't. They can be air-launched. What you see here is an air-launched thing. What they are is, if you remember, this goes back way back, during Desert Storm, Desert Shield, there was a Soviet missile that the Iraqis had called the Scuds. And then all the, I'm sorry, but CNN at the time was like the only 24-hour news network. The CNN reporters over there were called the Scud Studs because they went out there and they filmed the Scuds coming down. The thing with the Scud missile was its range wasn't nearly as far as the range on this. It's about maybe a fourth of what this range is. The other thing is they were horrible. They were area fire weapons, and they didn't hit what they were aimed at. They caused some damage, sometimes by mistake. But anyway, this has been re-engineered. It's you see a high apogee missile where it pops up and then pops back down. But it's same general concept, except it's more precision targeted. And that reportedly is what the Israelis used to hit the Khamenei compound, where they killed Ayatollah Khamenei and about 49 of his top officials. So that's one way. It can be ground launched as well. And I think it's very similar. As I recall, we have a similar missile to this. It's not exactly the same. But and everything they're doing there, let's just say it this way: when there's weapons development like this, the U.S. and the Israelis work very closely in many cases, and that's my recollection on this one.